My first book is coming out in about 6 months, so let's start working on the second. I've had so many ideas for this next book, and I just really want to get started. Hi, I'm Madeline Feierstein, trained historian and criminologist. I study prisons, hospitals, and America during wartime. And writing dozens of books is a life goal of mine. I love to write, be it articles, lectures, or YouTube scripts. While my biggest aspiration is to write historical fiction one day, I've channeled my academic and prior work experience to writing nonfiction. So I want to take you guys with me on this journey the second time around. This next book is going to be physically longer and probably more demanding of me than my first. My first book is on the Civil War history of my town, Alexandria, Virginia. I talk about how it was captured by the Union Army, its crazy new laws under military occupation, its 30 hospitals, 5 prisons, and of course, what daily life was like under martial law. When I write history, I prefer to use a social lens to look into what daily life was like and how civilians were affected. Now, my first book isn't technically out yet, right? But I want to get a head start on my second so that next year, in 2027, I can send a full draft to my publisher. But first, we need to decide exactly what I'm going to write about. So let's go. So here we have the 4 topics I'm very interested in writing about, and let's go through each of them. So Dr. Edwin Bentley is a Civil War surgeon who I've studied immensely. He led a very long and amazing life. I studied him for about 5 years so far, so he's pretty well known to me. This book would be a biography, okay? This book would be about his life, his career. He was, of course, a doctor, but he also was enlisted in the military, and then he worked with the mentally ill after the Civil War. He also founded a medical school. So there's a lot of topics to cover. So for this one, I would view it as talking about his life, his family, his work, the impact he made, and also, of course, thematic conversations around the things he did, like the Civil War, him being in my town, him going out to California and working with the mentally ill, him going to Arkansas and founding a medical school, right? There'd be topics like that. Now, with the 1910s, there's just so much happening. I'm very fascinated by this decade, and I do not think we talk about it enough. It often gets overlooked by the 1920s. And there's so much to it. You've got women's suffrage, World War I, Prohibition, the beginnings of what will become the largest immigration law in U.S. history, which will be passed in 1924. You've got eugenics. And, for me personally, I've studied the mid-1800s, right, like the 1840s to 1870s so much, pretty much exclusively over the last 3 years, that I really want to branch out into my other interests. Essentially, this would be a survey book, how the 1910s pretty much made modern America. Now, if you followed me through this channel or on Instagram for some time, you will know that I am very interested in psychiatric hospitals. I'm very interested in the people who built them and who ran them. And Thomas Story Kirkbride pioneered a revolutionary way to treat mental illness. And he built these very big, gothic, scary buildings with spacious rooms, lots of fresh air, and the idea that people need to be active and occupied in order to be cured. So this book would also be a biography, more focused on his life, his work, and then his legacy, because as many of you know, we don't really have insane asylums anymore. They don't really exist. So we have to look at really why these went out of fashion, and really the legacy of his work, and if it went so wrong for the patients, if his vision lasted way past his death, things like that. And then lastly, St. Elizabeth's Hospital is located in DC, and I live just outside of DC, and this is a very historic hospital. It is one of the Kirkbride buildings. It was built pretty early on in 1855. It is now the headquarters of the Department of Homeland Security. It was the first federal psychiatric hospital in our country, so the first, and actually only one of 2 to ever exist, where the federal government funded it entirely, and it was under basically the jurisdiction of the federal government rather than state or locally run. Some things have been published on it, but not terribly. The other 3 topics don't really have much on them. The 1910s, we've published about Prohibition, women's suffrage, World War I, right? But not really about that decade. Bentley and Kirkbride do not have extensive biographies on them. St. Elizabeth's has had some materials printed about it, but mainly about its architecture or in a more recent history. It's been in the news lately, so I feel like it kind of is more relevant. So now that we have a background into each of these topics, let's go ahead and discuss the pros and cons. And I'll make a list so we can look at this all together. So for Dr. Bentley, for our Civil War surgeon, obviously we love that there are varied topics. I love that there are many things I can talk about. It's not just going to be about him, it's about his life, and it's about what he's done, the innovations he's accomplished. And I feel like he should be more well known because of the things he's been able to do medically. He performed the first successful blood transfusion of the Civil War, which is pretty fascinating to me personally. So varied topics, we like that. I already know a lot about him, right? I already know a lot about Dr. Bentley. I don't really have to search that much. I kind of already know what the outline would be like for a book about him. I also think a pro is that there's like nothing written about him. I mean, I've published some articles on him, but there's no book with him in it. And so I feel like it's kind of an untapped potential. Cons, though, there are a couple I can think of. The thing is, it requires lots of travel because Dr. Bentley lived in many states and worked in many states. So he's from Connecticut, worked here in the DC area, out to California. Then he also fought in the Indian Wars in South Dakota, and then Arkansas, where he founded the medical school and then died. So I really have to travel a lot. Now, there's unfortunately, I'm gonna call them PCs. I call them personal curriculums, right? You guys know about those when you kind of develop like a self-study plan. The problem is I would need a couple of PCs for medical knowledge. Like there's a lot of medical terminology and concepts I'm not familiar with. I study hospitals, but I don't study medical history per se. I'm not looking at surgeries and how they're performed. I'm looking more at socially, how they affect society, how they reflect society. So I would have to do a couple of personal curriculums on like the medical terminology and do a lot of research on medicine. And also something I'm considering is it too close to my last book, my first book? Is it too close to what I've already written about? Because he is featured in my book coming out in 6 months. Because of course, in my city, he ran all the hospitals. That's how I got to know him. So the problem is maybe there's it's just too close to the last topic, and it may blend. It may not be. It may just be like a regurgitation, lack of better words, of what I just wrote about. Okay, keep that in mind. Let's talk about the 1910s. So also we got varied topics. I mean, it's a survey book, right? There are, a lot of things I can talk about. It's going to be an exciting one because you're kind of jumping from topic to topic. I don't have to spend too much time on this. Also, little travel involved, if any. I probably don't have to go anywhere for this information. Luckily, because I live in DC, I live next to the National Archives. So I don't have to worry too much about getting to the national records where like the military records are, or like, laws and things like that. A lot of that information is easily accessible to me here in the district. The problem is I have I need a lot of PCs for this topic, many PCs, because I am topically surface level familiar with like prohibition, women's suffrage, and World War I. I do not know a lot of in-depth details. I would have to do a lot more research on the subtopics, which I find personally fun, but it just makes the book a lot harder to write. I also want to take consideration the political climate, because a lot of the things that I want to write about are kind of heavy, or they talk about, for instance, immigration or women's rights and things that you would think, oh wow, today it's like the perfect time to be writing about it. But at the same time, I want it to do well, and I don't want it to get lost in a lot of the other books being published, if that makes sense. Okay, so for Thomas Story Kirkbride, some travel. I'm putting that as a pro, because I would have to go to Pennsylvania, where he was born and where he mainly worked. I may have to go to some of the hospitals, the asylum sites, but there's so many around me that he built, so it's not like an extensive amount of travel. And of course, there's little written. There's not enough written about him and like an actual biography, so I'm really looking forward to that. The problem is, a lot of these asylum sites are difficult to access. Like, you can't get to them. They are off limits, or like you can't legally get onto them. And I have tried to get legal access to many of these places for my research, but they're so derelict that even if you are, the king of the world, you're not going to get access to these things. And also, while I study asylums, there's a lot of medical knowledge I just am not familiar with because Kirkbride was a physician first. And so a lot of the things that, I study the impact of asylums on a society, the impact of how we view mental illness with eugenics and stuff, but I study lobotomies, but I don't know how they operate. I don't know the medical terminology. So I'd have to do some more like medical research on this per se to really understand the actual things they've done. Like I know what hydrotherapy does to the body. I know what electroshock does to the brain, but I don't know the medical terms to describe what happens during that process. And lastly, St. Elizabeth's, which is if I were to write about one asylum right now, that would be it. I have access to the National Archives. So all of the St. Elizabeth's materials are held at NARA, the National Archives and Records Administrations here in DC. So I can access all of their materials, and I have accessed this before. So pros, maybe this is a pro, because now it's Department of Homeland Security. It could possibly be it could sell better because of all of the really bad news coming out about DHS and what they've been doing. And the thing is, DHS has also essentially threatened. They almost went through with it, with demolishing historic outbuildings on the property, and they got them a lot of slack for that. So it's possible that I can actually lean into the political climate, and this book would pop off more than it would have at a different time. But it being DHS means I can't get on site easily because it's DHS. So it's tough because I'm trying to research a building and I can't go up to the building. I can't really go where it used to be or where it was. It's very hard. The Coast Guard is also there, so it's just kind of a lockdown situation. And also, if I'm going to write about a Kirkbride building, I think I'd want to write about Kirkbride first, right? It would kind of make sense to talk about the man who built these places. Not physically with his own two hands, but whose ideas this stemmed from. And then write about the places themselves. So this is kind of what we're looking at here, guys. So after some consideration, I've decided to go with Dr. Bentley. And you're probably thinking, wouldn't the 1910s be the one you'd go for? Maybe even Kirkbride, so you can talk about other things. The thing is, I kind of want to lean into my first book. I know one of the cons was it was too close to my first book, but at the same time, I don't envision myself coming back to Dr. Bentley in 3, 4, 5 years. I feel like I want to lean on the momentum of the first book. And also, look, his life in Alexandria during the Civil War is one part of it. There are so many other factors here that we need to consider with him. There's so many other topics. Let's say I have a 6-chapter book or 7-chapter book for him. The Civil War is just kind of one chapter for it. Or, looking at his life in parts, early life, getting started in medicine, Civil War, then he goes out to South Dakota, then California, then Arkansas, right? Those are like 5, 6 parts in themselves. So the Civil War, it's a huge part of his life. But the way I can phrase it is, it's only one segment of it. And also, I already know so much about him. Unlike the other 3 topics, I have a very good foundation. And since I am running my own business, I want to make sure I don't have too much friction with my other projects. So we're going to be writing together a biography about Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Edwin Bentley. And don't worry if you guys were rooting for the other 3. I am writing those in the future. And so if you want to come join me on this journey to write a nonfiction biography, don't stress too much about, I don't like the Civil War, or this is too much medical stuff. You can also think of it as your own project. And we're going to be talking about troubleshooting, researching sources, outlining. So no worries if you're not into the history aspects of it, or even you may not end up not liking Dr. Bentley by the time this book writing process is done. I hope you guys join me. Let me know if you're writing a book and how you chose the topic, because I find that process so fascinating. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.